Welcome to Become a Provider, a weekly podcast inspiring leaders and parents to be servant leaders and providers. I'm Justin Thomas, a business consultant, health coach, CEO, and author. Together, we'll explore servant leadership through interviews with leaders that I respect. Plus, I will share lessons from my life and career trying to model the ultimate provider, Jesus. Whether you're an executive, community leader, parent, or simply want to make a positive difference, this podcast is for you. Let's begin. Welcome back to the Become a Provider show, and today is a special episode. I get to reflect on 5 lessons from the 5th fellowship. For those just tuning in, a quick recap. This show, Become a Provider, is in honor of the legacy and the life of my father, C.L. Thomas. And so what my dad left for me was a great example of being a provider, a beautiful and perfect example. And he was a Christ follower, man of faith, hard man with a different type of background than you may expect. And his life is what inspired me to reflect on what does it mean to become a provider? Thus the book, thus this show, and the nonprofit, as well as the program called the C.L. Thomas Fellowship. So after he passed away, I thought, well, let's start a men's group around this. And since that time, I've led 5 groups. Now, I will say my wife, Amy, has also led a couple women's groups as well. But I wanted to share the most recent group and 5 lessons that I'm taking away from it. So this is a 9-month intentional program. I gather together different guys, and for a season of life, we journey together. We meet once a month, and we just do life together. But more importantly, we're on a journey together of trying to provide like Jesus for ourselves and for others. So since the fellowship started about 7 years ago, I've done 5 groups. So about every year or 2, I'm facilitating a group, and I thought, what a wonderful opportunity to reflect on it for my benefit, but also hopefully to inspire you. And right up front, let me say that my agenda here is not that you lead your own fellowship group, but if you want to, I'm happy to share with you all the handouts and the program that I do. In fact, there's a church in Dublin, Ireland that has been doing it for several years, and I've got a couple friends in Durham, North Carolina, leading their own groups. And then here in Hillsborough, North Carolina, where I'm based out of, I typically facilitate a group every year or 2. So with that said, what I want to do is just to share with you some of the lessons that I'm taking away from this group, not so that you feel compelled to launch your own group, but that you feel inspired to do whatever God has called you to do in your life. In fact, I'm really in the mindset of this because this past weekend, as part of the C.L. Thomas Fellowship experience, we typically do what's called a Journey of Generosity event. This is an event that I attended with Amy several years ago as a participant, and since that time, we have been trained as facilitators, and we've been going to events and facilitating events for the last several years. And it was so impactful that I said, I want this to be part of the fellowship experience. And the quick rundown of the Journey of Generosity is that it's a 22-hour retreat, and it's designed to give you space and time to reflect on this theme of biblical generosity, which is part of the provider wheel, the provider journey, the content that we review during the C.L. Thomas Fellowship. And the takeaway is that giving is a heart issue. We serve a very generous God, and so it's just natural for us to be generous as well, but things get in the way. And so sometimes it's nice to be in a safe place, learn from others, watch some inspiring videos, and consider what is it that God is calling us to do. And what I love about that Journey of Generosity retreat is that it challenges you to say, hey, we're not here to be prescriptive, to tell you what to give, how to give, none of that. But what we want to do is encourage you to give what the Lord has told you to give, and in the way the Lord has given you, and do it with a cheerful heart. So the same attitude with this episode from me to you is that, hey, whatever the Lord is inspiring you to do, whether it's facilitating a C.L. Thomas Fellowship group or doing a small group through your church or just doing something for yourself, I hope that you do it with a cheerful heart. And if you do, then maybe you can experience some of these beautiful takeaways that I was given over the last 9 months by my role facilitating the latest C.L. Thomas Fellowship group. So let's get right into it. The 5 things I'm taking away from the fellowship in honor of my 5th one. So here it is. The first one is do things you want to do. Now, this might seem obvious, but a lot of times we're doing things just out of maybe social norms or we feel pressured to do it. And at the end of the day, I feel like we should do things you want to do that is in alignment with what God has called us to do. And I think when we do those things, people can tell. And so that was part of the feedback that I received during the course of this last fellowship group is that the guys would mention to me on the side or even at the end of the fellowship experience, they would say things like, "Oh, you're doing what you should be doing, Justin. Like facilitating this group is obviously what you should be doing." And so that's my desire for you all is that do what you want to do. And especially if it's a desire the Lord has given you. For me, I will always be doing the work of the C.L. Thomas Fellowship. It may look different over the years. I don't know. But for now, it's a fun adventure to do for myself, to provide like Jesus, and to carry that on for my family. And hopefully that is a blessing for them as well. I'll bring back some nuggets about the family in a later lesson. But for now, number one, do things you want to do. Secondly, courageous generosity. So this was feedback that I got from this year's group of men. And I should say that we just finished in part of the last meeting. All the guys had an opportunity to share their last reflections, and then the group gave encouragement to one another and prayed over one another. And one of the phrases that stood out to me, one of the guys said that I was courageously generous. And that was a great honor. And I've said during the fellowship experience that my desire for the men of the is that I want to give them my best. And what I mean by that is, just like I mentioned earlier, if there's something that has benefited me along my journey, then I want to share that with others, such as the journey of generosity. And it's cute and probably perfectly timing of this story, but just tonight I read with my girls The Way of the Warrior Kid is a book series by Jocko Willink, a retired Navy SEAL and also an author. He generally writes business books, but he has this children's series called The Way of the Warrior Kid. And tonight's lesson was all about do a great job, but don't try to be perfect because no one is perfect. And that relates to this point about being courageously generous by giving your best while not worrying about perfection. There's a lot of things that, hey, I wish I would have done better during the fellowship, and things I know I certainly was not perfect. But one of the things I try to do is express my heart to the men of the group to say, hey, I want to give you my best. So that's point number 2, one of my takeaways. Let's see. The third lesson is to be brave, make the ask. And so whenever you launch something, if you are an entrepreneur or if you're leading a small group or just trying to throw a party, is that at the end of the day, you just have to make an ask. And this is something that I continue to grow in as well, both in sales for work and my entrepreneurship journey, and also for the C.L. Thomas Fellowship, is that in order for it to be a special invitation, you actually need to invite people. You can't just assume they're just going to come and say, hey, Justin, I just want to do this. I've been doing this for several years now, over the last 7 years, and 5 groups, and I still have to be prayerful about who should I invite and to be brave enough to make the invitation. And there's a lot of guys that say, no, I'm not interested in that at all, Justin. And others just, this was just the right group, the right time. And that's what several of the guys said as we finished up this group. You never know. And what's the worst thing that can happen? You just have to be okay with rejection. I've got another friend who told that to me. He leads fellowship groups and a variety of other groups. And he said, Justin, I've just become comfortable with rejection. And I loved that quote because a lot of us aren't. I'm not. So be brave, make the ask. Another lesson from the 5th fellowship. And then number 4, balance structure and space. This was a beautiful lesson that I learned during this fellowship group. And this was a direct quote from one of the guys saying that he felt like the experience that we had together had a nice balance between having enough structure to maximize the time, but also space for the Holy Spirit and God to do his work as well. So that was such a compliment. And I continued to grow in this, but I think one of the things that helped me was this idea of smart brevity. It's something that I try to do in my newsletters and I try to do in the fellowship. And so what is smart brevity? It's a book and it's a methodology of communication, Basically, trying to identify what's the one big thing you're trying to get across, like the one message, and then make that very clear and upfront, and then have supporting points to that main big takeaway for those that want to dive into the detail. So just to be thoughtful enough to present that and then let people go in it. And so what that looks like in the fellowship is that the guys know what to expect. We have a book a month, a verse a month, a challenge a month, and a one-pager where they come prepared each month with their printouts, one for themselves and one for all the guys. And this year we did a little tweak of what's the one big thing from the book? What's the one big thing from the verse? What's the one big thing that you want accountability on? And sometimes we'd sprinkle in some other challenges during the course of the experience. So that's how I try to find some balance between that structure and space. And also during the meetings, there's a personal challenge of mine of how can I make this a little bit more fun? How can I do this in a way that the guys are enjoying it? So it's not always the exact same, even though it is on some level where it's like the same general structure. But sometimes, for instance, we meet outside, and sometimes we would walk to different locations around the house, depending on the theme or the question asked. So just little things I try to do to be a good facilitator. And then lastly, the fifth lesson from the fifth fellowship is family involvement is so important. The surprising thing for me is it's not only important for myself, which would make sense, but it seems to be a unique memory from guys in the group where they reflect back on me. Yeah, it's so cool, Justin, to see your family involved in the fellowship. Like, yeah, it's your thing, but actually it's really the family's thing where they are part of this experience as well. And what they mean by that is when we launched this year's fellowship, we did it on my birthday. And so my family rallied and we hosted the men and their families as well. And that's what I wanted for my birthday, was to launch a C.L. Thomas Fellowship group. And so that was really fun to have that family involvement. And then during the course of the meetings, we would have optional dinners where before the meetings, guys could come over. And my family was often involved in that and the preparation and sometimes making cute signs, sidewalk chalk, or actual signs on the door welcoming the guys into our house. And then even for this last meeting, the girls helped me run some errands of I really wanted to try to make the last meeting different and have a one-page handout that I gave to the guys that was printed on glossy paper. And so we just, went out to Staples and picked it up together, and it was just fun to review it with them. And in addition to that, last night we were having our dinner before the meeting, and I asked the girls, like, oh, you ready to join us? And they said, no, just start without us. And what I came to find out was that they were trying to find a version of the shirt that I'm wearing here for those watching, the C.L. Thomas Fellowship t-shirt. And we have some small sizes for them. And so they come down during dinner. I'm sitting down at the table with the guys, and all of a sudden the girls come down with their matching C.L. Thomas Fellowship shirts. Just a surprise to me and a delight to the guys, just showing how the girls are in tune. Like, they know exactly what's going on with these groups and are supporting me in their own cute way. Just want to do a quick show here to reflect on another fellowship being complete. And man, these take a lot of work, but they're so satisfying because of these lessons that I've learned. So I want to remember this. So I'm doing this selfishly for myself to document the journey, but also to encourage you to take that next step. And maybe you'll have an opportunity to learn these lessons like I did. So just to recap the 5 lessons from the fifth fellowship: do things you want to do, be courageously generous, be brave, make the ask, balance structure and space, and lastly, involve the family and have some fun with it. So with that said, keep blessing and protecting, be a provider for yourself and for others like Jesus. Cheers. Thank you for listening to the Become a Provider show. If you've enjoyed today's episode and want to continue your journey in servant leadership, I invite you to sign up for my free weekly newsletter, Always Provide. Head over to alwaysprovide.org to subscribe. Each week you'll receive insights, inspiration, and practical tips to help you grow as a servant leader and provider in all areas of your life. Before we wrap up, I'd like to remind you that this podcast is a ministry of the C.L. Thomas Fellowship, a nonprofit organization created to honor my late father, an exemplary provider. The fellowship is dedicated to providing free resources that inspire parents and leaders to emulate Jesus as a servant leader and provider. Your support helps continue this important work. If you found value in today's episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or leaving us a review on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, remember, we're all called to be providers. Let's make a positive difference by serving others. Keep blessing and protecting.